Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our panel, our AIGADC virtual panel, because, that seems to be our way of life now. But it's good to see so many good and nice and happy faces. And especially, dealing with such a complicated and complex topic as developing international collaborations in design, right? I'm sure that's something that we will definitely talk about, how to address complexities and how to, be very honest with ourselves and those participants, in anywhere else in the world about trying to do things the most respectful way possible. So first of all, before I start, I want to dedicate this event to the memory of Victor Davila Sr., who is the father of our new AIGADC member, Victor Davila, who passed away 7 days ago exactly. We send Victor and his family love and peace. And also, as we get closer to the celebration of El Día de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead, I also want to send my love to any of our relatives, parents, or friends who have also passed away and who we all love very much. So I'm going to do a quick introduction to the topic. So as I said before, I think that thinking about expanding the power of collaboration in design in international ways when we collaborate with, even if it is a binational effort or people in different parts of the world, I keep thinking that one of the most important aspects to consider is, first of all, how and when we plan the logistics and the role and the importance of social, cultural, historic, in basically context of all the participants. And one thing that I am also very always thinking about is the culture of time, how we utilize time, how we organize around people's time, and what it means for different persons in different cultures and societies. So, these are sort of like three elements that I always think about first when it comes to international design collaborations. So for us to expand this discussion, I invited 4 amazing designers, colleagues, and people who I can call friends that have all had a good, and I'm sure that many lessons learned for the last years doing international design collaborations. They have very important knowledge that is worth sharing. Especially, for any of us in design academia who are either planning or, coming back to resuming design projects for research or for creative practice. And it is a very interesting adventure to do international design collaborations, in many ways an honor as well. So let's hear from well, the panelists that I invited are Denielle Emans from VCU Qatar, Kelly Murdoch-Kitt from University of Michigan, Lesley-Ann Noel from Tulane, and Maria Rogal from the University of Florida. So I'm going to start introducing Denielle and Kelly, who are going to be telling us about their work together. So Denielle Emans is an associate professor at Virginia Commonwealth University School of the Arts in Qatar. And she provided this very nice slide. She is passionate about collaboration, storytelling, and empowering teams to build strong relationships to fuel creative action. And she recently completed a PhD in communication for social change at the University of Queensland. She is located in Doha, Qatar, but is currently in Michigan. And also from Michigan, it's Kelly Murdoch-Kitt, assistant professor at the University of Michigan STEM School of Art and Design. And she integrates visual communication, interaction design, and service design with global and social responsibility, and uses visual thinking to promote diverse collaborations and equitable teams. So with that, I'll just pass the torch to Kelly, who is going to be handling this slide deck from a distance.
Yes,
So,
we're gonna experiment, see how this works, Gaby.
yes.
Thank you so much, Gaby. We really appreciate the introduction. We're really honored to be on this panel with such an amazing group of faculty and practitioners, and just thank you in advance for this opportunity. So Kelly and I have been working in this space for about 9 years now, and we've been using a grounded theory approach to examine how visual thinking activities improve the process of our participants' involvement and outcomes in international design collaboration. We've designed these activities based on the constructive developmental paradigm and introduced them to over 230 participants. And these participants have come from more than 23 different countries.
And they've been based at the 5 different academic institutions where we've taught together over this time. So over the years, in assessing all of this data that you can imagine we've gathered in testing and refining these different methods of visual thinking that we've developed for facilitating these collaborations, we've developed what we call the 6 dimensions of intercultural teamwork. And these 6 dimensions work together as a progression to help intercultural teammates get to know each other and also build the trust that we believe is essential as a foundation to doing productive work together. And specifically in our case, building those bridges that enable our design teams to address global wicked problems.
So intercultural learning also has some good foundations in the literature, and there's a lot of other groups that support this type of work. So we're also drawing from sources such as the Council of Europe, for example, with principles such as establishing equal trust and status within a situation, developing common goals, facilitating intergroup cooperation, as well as establishing the presence of some social norms that support intergroup contact.
And on a pedagogical level, Denielle and I are asking questions like, how might we teach intercultural learning as part of the design curriculum? How might we foster intercultural communication skills in our classrooms? And how are we going to support these productive design collaborations between students who are located so far apart? In our case, North America and the Middle East.
And really throughout all of this, we're demonstrating to students in various ways why they should value diversity. We're helping them to learn how to deal constructively with conflict. And we've been looking at the topic of collaboration online in intercultural learning from the perspective of using design and design processes to actually design a better way for these complex teams to collaborate.
To give you a quick overview of our process, we usually start by doing some preparatory activities with our 2 separate groups before they even meet each other. So we're doing some introductory visual thinking activities as well as introducing a common project prompt. And so these initial activities are actually very important for setting a stage for them to later come together as groups, because they focus on mitigating biases and especially unconscious bias that they are likely bringing to the table, and really reinforcing this as something that's normal and natural, but that's something we need to become aware of so we can work through it and confront it.
So once we form teams, we introduce additional activities and observe how the activities work, as well as how the project and the collaboration outcomes happen. This is a bit of a rinse and repeat process. So we're comparing how these activities work from one cohort to the next and looking for patterns and developing new theory based on these patterns, which utilizes the grounded theory approach to research and analyze the data.
So we want to walk you through a few projects. The first is from an introductory typography course. We were both teaching the same level and same type of course at the same time. And we call it 3 designers, 2 continents, 1 cause, because we had mostly teams of 3 students working between Doha and Ann Arbor. And the causes that they were working on came through in pairs of designed light post banners. We'll show you some examples in a moment. And these were centered around different topics of discrimination that addressed ideas or solutions based on the teammates' particular cultural perspectives. So this is an intersection of intercultural learning with type and communication techniques.
Right. So as Kelly mentioned, the one cause. Each team explored a different facet of discrimination, and their specific topics emerged through a video exchange, which is one of the visual thinking activities we have students do as a lead up in forming their teams. In this case, within the umbrella topic of discrimination. And so Kelly's going to show you some of that, what that process looks like.
Yeah, this is a quick overview of how the process works and how we manage this chaos and complexity, and the various phases that go into helping our students really prepare for intercultural learning and engaging in that experience, and their reflections on themselves, their partnerships, and the project overall.
So in addition to the process that Kelly just shared with you, this is a quick overview of some of those kind of communication techniques that were also introduced as part of this process. So while students are learning about these things, they're also quickly generating examples based on the topics that they've identified in their pre-recorded videos. And so we want to share some of those exciting outcomes with you and a little bit of process.
So yeah, they did a ton of process work. They were constantly designing and remixing and refining each other's ideas throughout, and finally, presenting refined work. So these are final banners from the team whose work you just saw, process work you just saw, and it enabled the students to actually utilize their expertise in languages other than English, and languages that don't rely on a Latin character set. So for us, this was very exciting in teaching a type course. The one on the left talks about being discriminated against, and the one on the right talks about being targeted. Other topics, we had a lot that centered around language and nationality discrimination, some that dealt more directly with implicit and explicit bias, and a number of banners that were focused on topics of gender equality, gender discrimination, and other gender-related issues.
And so this work has been featured in a juried exhibition in Tasmin, Doha, which is a biennial design conference in Qatar. My favorite shot here is in the top left, where you can see Kelly's student Edgar's face as a cutout with my students holding it. And this really kind of reflects that closeness that our students develop in the course of a project like this.
And several of these banners were also selected in a juried exhibition and produced and hung on the streets of Morgantown, West Virginia, as part of the Design Across Divides conference last year. So these external exhibition opportunities actually really help motivate the students and gives them another shared goal to work toward together beyond just doing the project, as if the project wasn't already enough, right?
Right. And so we want to also share another project with you. And this was a collaborative project between two interaction design courses where students engage in a project we called Playful and Inclusive Interactive Spaces. And here they were asked to design an interactive concept for spatial, social, playful, and cultural engagement using video sketches. So you can imagine this had a lot to it, and it combines intercultural learning with collaborative video. And here's kind of how that complexity plays out in this project, and all again with the goals of having students prepare, engage, and reflect on intercultural learning. And so in the interest of time, we have a pre-recorded video that kind of walks you through some of those student outcomes that Kelly will play now.
You might need Gaby to jack up her sound. Can you unmute yourself, Gaby? Thanks. No, because you got your headphones in.
It's not.
Oh, they're not in? Okay.
This project.
Do you want to start again?
I hear it. I hear it.
To connect.
Hey, I can hear it now.
Sorry, everyone.
That's okay.
Technical difficulties.
People to vision and communicate.
We had a group that was focused on religious unity. We had one group that was really intrigued by the time difference and thinking about how to bring each other together in a shared virtual studio environment. So this is a reel that we cut together of some of the final videos.
Yeah.
As you're very good at cutting out background audio.
Different and more developed than we started off with. The feedback from the other culture had an effect on the overall outcome and was very different from the feedback we would have received from our peers in class.
Here, students proposed a multilingual platform to highlight similarities between two people from completely different walks of life by connecting people's shared dreams with one another. The platform would connect the constellation of dreams across both spaces that people can contribute to and connect with each other.
In this that last project, they're thinking about like aspirations and sharing those in a crowd visualization.
To share them with the universe while being inspired by the thoughts and dreams of others.
In this project, the team of students used 3D modeling to represent how stressed out students might find a playful and accessible place to unwind. They proposed interactive environments that would link Qatar Foundation with the University of Michigan via digitally mediated interactive architectural and sculptural elements.
My favorite part of the experience was understanding what my team members valued. Our collaboration really showed us how to design something that could not only connect cultures but transcend boundaries so that the experience could be applicable to anyone.
The mission of this project was to promote awareness and connectivity between the two cities through projections of light and color. By walking in each other's steps, people might feel more connected with people in other parts of the world. The light boxes were site-specific installations to bring awareness of culture through sound and touch. The students' project reflections collectively highlight the extensive learning outcomes offered in a project involving the dynamic interplay between intercultural engagement and collaborative video design. We believe that diverse stories constructed from genuine respect, understanding, and appreciation of cultural and social values can only help expand the stories we tell on screen. It can also change the way we see and value diversity in teamwork.
It will let me advance to the next slide.
It's like, halas, you're done.
I know, right? There it goes. Maybe. If I hit it again, it's going to go too far, right? Just wait a second. There it goes. So in closing, we want to thank you again for this opportunity to share our research as well as some of our course outcomes with you all. And we're really excited to engage with this panel and also learn from our fellow panelists' experiences. So we also welcome you to check out our recently published book, which contains more than 30 of our visual thinking activities to support intercultural teamwork in design and beyond. Thanks again, Gaby.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Kelly and Denielle. Very interesting, very fancy. A lot of video and interactivity. That's really great. I am going to check the chat just for a second to see if there are any pressing items. Yeah, flashback to Decipher. Yeah, thank you. And yeah, thank you for sharing contact information and some of the links as well. So our next panelist is Dr. Lesley-Ann Noel, who is an Associate Director of Design Thinking for Social Impact and Professor of Practice at the Phyllis M. Taylor Center for Social Innovation and Design Thinking at Tulane University. She practices design through emancipatory, critical, and anti-hegemonic lenses focusing on equity, social justice, and the experiences of people who are often excluded from design research. Her research also highlights the work of designers outside of Europe and North America as an act of decolonizing design. She also attempts to promote greater critical awareness among designers and design students by introducing critical theory concepts and vocabulary into the design studio. For example, through the Designer's Critical Alphabet. She is from Trinidad and Tobago and has degrees in industrial design from the University Federal do Paraná in Brazil, a master's degree in business administration from the University of West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago, and her PhD in design from North Carolina State University in 2018. She's one of the founders of the Pluriversal Design Special Interest Group with the UK-based International Design Research Society. So with that, we welcome Lesley.
Hi, and we didn't figure out these logistics. Like, I actually don't know, do I request remote control to be able to advance the slides? I'll try that.
I have, for of you, I have 2 slides, but I didn't know if you wanted to share more.
Oh, okay. So, okay, maybe I'm looking at a different document now, because I'm looking at something where I have some slides in it. Let's see. Okay, so anyway, hi everybody. So yes, I am Lesley-Ann Noel, and I'm the Associate Director of Design Thinking for Social Impact at, as Gaby said, that very long name, the Phyllis M. Taylor Center for for Social Innovation and Design Thinking. So it's such a long title. And I have a bit of a presentation, and I also have a little bit of some like open conversation, right? So let me see if I can.
So I can stop sharing and you can then share.
Are you sure?
They're in the slides, actually.
That's what I was thinking. They're in that same presentation. Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe if you refresh.
Yeah, if you just back out of the sharing.
Or actually, since you've stopped sharing, then I can share here. And then, oh, and of course we had a hurricane.
Oh, the orange slides.
Yes, the orange slides.
Okay, no, hold on. I can share again. No worries.
And how will we advance though?
Okay, keep going then.
So my aside, I live in New Orleans, and we had a storm, of course, on Wednesday because it's New Orleans, right? And so if you hear hammering in the background, it's because we're rebuilding, right? But yes, so I've been doing, Gaby, thanks for this invitation. When you called me, I thought, okay, so what are we actually going to talk about? But I have been working on international collaboration because, of course, I'm an international person, right? And maybe I haven't been doing it in the way that some people think about doing it. I've been very intentional in building relationships with the people that I work with, so like this image here is a photograph of me in Uganda from, I think, back in 2005, where I created a program around information and communication technology for women entrepreneurs in Uganda. And I hadn't yet started to do like participatory action research or, use that kind of model of work. But this project, I guess, shows the values that I was bringing into this anyway, where I really sat down with the women and said, okay, I was sent here to do X. What do we really want out of this program? And then I designed the program in a way around the needs of the women, and really focused on some very simple things. Not even designing a website, starting to use email, creating email addresses, figuring out how to use Word and Excel. But this is an example of designing things around what people need rather than what people say, what these organizations send us to do, okay? So I'm gonna share, this is a presentation that I did at CAA. It's a few slides from a presentation that I did at CAA in February, where I'm talking about decolonizing design education by flipping the direction of international collaboration, which is one thing that I've been experimenting with, where I did a class between some students in Trinidad and Tobago, where I'm from, and some students in California, where we gave all of the power, or the majority of the power, to the students in Trinidad, and then the students in California with the subjects. Because what very often happens in these design collaborations is that, we kind of exoticize people deep in the third world, and, people from what we'll call the global north go off into the third world and the jungle and wherever, and try to figure out what are the problems of the people out there. I mean, you know what, let's just flip this class so that the people who are in the jungle, of course they're not in the jungle, I'm being sarcastic when I say this, they're the ones who are studying the people who are in Silicon Valley. And so we flipped that to see what was the experience of the students. And it was interesting in the reflections at the end to see how uncomfortable the students were. The students in California were very uncomfortable with being studied. And then the intention of this collaboration was just to get people to be more reflective about how we do this kind of work. So one of the ideas that started me thinking about the need to do that kind of intervention is that I overheard, I'm always a fly on the wall. So I mean, people who are around me need to be aware of that. But I overheard the professor who was responsible for this class saying, we only work in developing countries because we can't solve our problems in 1 or 2 semesters. Our problems are too complex. So it's like people out there, we could go and solve their problems, but we can't work on ours, right? Well, this is Angelina Jolie, often somewhere, there are always uncomfortable power dynamics in these relationships, and we have to bring these dynamics to the surface and think about them as we design a collaboration. So I mean, yes, international collaborations are good because they provide exposure to real world challenges in a complex environment, but there are also some challenges, right? They perpetuate stereotypical narratives about dysfunction in developing countries. Very often, we are using a kind of savior complex, whether it's white savior complex or creative savior complex, as we go off into these exotic countries. It promotes a kind of helicopterism where we fly in and we solve your problems and then we leave. And then often there's a little acknowledgement of the privilege that allows access. So as a designer who was working in the Caribbean, I used to be very frustrated that the designers who would come in to work on these types of projects never really acknowledged that as these outsiders, they had access that a local designer might not have. So it's not necessarily that they are better designers. It is that just being this outsider gives them privilege, and I worked in international development for quite some time. And I used to say, well, why not really work on building the bridge between the designers rather than just having the international person come in and then leave. So in these types of international collaboration classes, which are often touted as best practices, I challenge that because my thing is that there are often design schools on the ground. And Gaby, you could send me a message when I'm overtime because I'm I'm just on my soapbox talking, right? But there are always designers, there's always expertise on the ground. And couldn't a better partnership happen if we are working with the expertise on the ground rather than being these outsiders and kind of taking away space from the people on the ground, okay? So I do ask that question, you know, how might we leverage the benefit of international collaboration in a way that does less harm? And I literally just came from a discussion. I'm in another group, and we have a book club on Fridays, and we were just discussing Paulo Freire. And that helps, we think, and I actually used Freire in my PhD. But Freire is somebody, Paulo Freire is somebody that people who are doing this kind of work should be reading, all designers should be reading actually, where we have to figure out how we can challenge traditional power dynamics and asymmetries in the work that we're doing. We have to understand that that knowledge is manifested in different ways. So we may have one level of expert knowledge as designers, and then the community partners have a different lived experience knowledge that we have to be aware of and be respectful of. We have to slow down, okay? You know, the academic year is not always designed around things that are feasible, you know, and relationships that are feasible. And so we have to figure out, okay, what is it that we can actually do in this time, and sometimes forget a little bit of that speed that we're trying to use in, whether it's the academic year or whether it's a three-week camp in wherever that we're trying to do. But, you know, what can realistically be done in a way that's respectful of people, right? We have to be very mindful of things like saviorism, helicoptering, and a lack of acknowledgement of our privilege. And then now to use words that are really more related to Freire, you know, we have to acknowledge our roles in oppression and being oppressed, and understand that the two things are tied. So if we are the oppressors, we are not achieving our full capacity as human beings. And it's the same way if we are the oppressed, we are not achieving our full capacity. And we can both unlearn those behaviors as we move along. So we have to question these things. And so my last thing is read Paulo Freire. Of course, everybody needs a copy. This book is widely available on the internet for download, but buy a copy and keep it next to your bedside. Read Bell Hooks, read Ira Shore, Empowering Education. You know, we need to read about doing good and intentional collaborative work. And there are many other disciplines that are doing this that we can borrow from as designers. So Gaby, I hope that I am on time.
Perfect timing. Thank you so much, Lesley.
Okay.
I know, yeah. So thank you. Yeah, those are definitely absolutely true elements that we need to consider every time that we're, you know, doing this kind of work. And our fourth panelist is Maria Rogal. She is a professor of graphic design and visual communications in the School of Art and Art History at the University of Florida, which she has been teaching since 2001. Her transcultural background influences her work, which focuses on the relationship between culture and design and how we can leverage the potential of design to positively shape the human experience. She's the founder of D4D Lab, an award-winning initiative to co-design with indigenous entrepreneurs and subject matter experts in Mexico, generating sustainable and responsible local outcomes. In 2020, she co-founded Co-Designing Equitable Futures, an inter and transdisciplinary research project connecting Gainesville, Florida, and the University of Florida communities to explore ways to confront systemic inequity by co-designing with people. Maria is also at work on a manuscript with Raul Sanchez entitled Designing with People, Fieldwork Methods for Designers. She also writes and presents on design pedagogy and interdisciplinary methods. And her research, recent publication includes Co-Designing for Development in the Routledge Handbook of Sustainable Design, also co-author with Sanchez, Identity and Representation, Yucatec Maya and the Visual Culture of Tourism in the Latin American and Caribbean Ethnic Studies Journal, and she contributed to EcoGrata Design Education Manifesto. She's the recipient of several grants, including 1 Fulbright and 2 Fulbright Hayes grants, a SAPI Ideas That Matter grant, and the inaugural AIGA Design Research Grant. And her creative work was featured in national and international juried exhibitions, and she serves as juror and jury chair for the Design Incubation Communication Design Educators Awards program from 2016 to the present. And Maria has also received her MFA in Design and Visual Communication from VCU, the Virginia Commonwealth University. We have an amazing panel, I told you. So with that, I am just going to start sharing my screen with you all.
Thank you, Gaby. Thanks.
My pleasure.
I just have a few slides.
Hold on.
It's just so, it's really great to see all of these in the work. So, you know, I'm going to start by echoing everything that Lesley said. So, what can you click into presentation mode?
Yes.
And I actually can just tell you when I have so few slides. So, you know, I think I just wanted to begin by stating that I come to this, I think, from an international perspective as a child, acknowledging that I grew up in really privileged spaces, but had really opportunities to live in different countries, Laos, Peru, Liberia, Mexico. So these were really different parts of the world, and also parents who traveled, and my father worked in development. And I grew up at a time when things were called third world countries, which we no longer think about that, because what I actually learned from the people that I was collaborating with and working with and living with and learning from was essentially that there are so many different kinds of knowledges in the world, and that different kinds of power structures exist. So I think that the thing that kind of is embedded in my work and the way that I think about work and think about design is power. And I'm particularly, my work internationally and also my work now in Gainesville, it has really got this sense of trying to kind of understand power in terms of how designers work within these constructs. And I think that's really critical for us to be thinking about design as designers, whether we are working in our own backyards or whether we are working, you know, internationally. I think related to that, what's really critical for me when thinking about power is what are the opportunities that we have as we work in the margins and we try to decenter ourselves and decenter our knowledge. So I think that's really critical. I've put a few slides up here. Really, I think that one of the first projects that I've worked on, actually, can you go back really quick? I think one of the first projects that I've worked on is this kind of middle, you know, this middle project. I'll just go ahead and request remote control. And thank you. So this kind of middle one that we're looking at is working in Mexico and with subject matter experts and being invited in. So when I talked to Gaby about this panel, I'm like, what do you think I could talk about that might be a bit different than what I normally talk about? And one thing I tend to never get to is how I've started and how I'm thinking about the work. So, you know, to really be clear, all of my international collaborations, working on the margins, working in the margins, working with people who have been systemically marginalized, really come from the idea that, the idea that we really need to be kind of focused on how we get invited and how we begin our first steps. And I think the Paulo Freire quote, or the Paulo Freire idea of first contact, is really important here. Gaby, I requested remote control, but I'm just going to ask if you could flip to the next slide. And thank you. And I think when the idea of first contact for me is really critical, because it doesn't mean that we're discovering somebody that doesn't exist. It means that we have to be prepared to be able to enter a space and learn from people in that space. And so my work really has focused on working with people in indigenous communities in Mexico, in the Yucatan region, and also in Western Mexico, in the states of Jalisco and Nayarit. And that's my international work. So to give a little bit of context to that, the projects that I have worked on with my students, and that's been really important for me to be able to bring opportunities to students, have been because of connections that I have made either through conferences, mostly academic connections, with people in other disciplines. So not other designers, but people like intercultural communication experts, scientists, biologists, people who are working in the field, as well as working on projects in the field myself. And by in the field, I mean actually leaving the studio and working somewhere in a community, in a space, meeting people where they are, working in context. So that's basically the only kind of work that I want to do now, because I think it's really important for designers and design students to get out of the classroom and out of our vacuums of kind of pretend projects that we're working on, and have some experiences that we can learn, that things that we couldn't possibly structure or formulate or think about as design educators come into play when you're actually working in the field. So examples of that mean literally traveling somewhere and spending 10 to 14 to however many days there, but also returning. So when I'm thinking about the work that I think is important as design educators, I think of this normative methodology that we've tended to practice, and moving into a horizontal methodology where I can see probably everybody here working within the idea that you're designing with, that you're partnering, that you're committing to something long-term. I think what Lesley-Ann brought up was, what is overheard is we can't possibly do this. This doesn't fit into the time frame. Time becomes totally critical in terms of the way that we think about the time that we're working, how we're working, our expectations, framing student expectations, but also framing partner expectations. So every project that I've taken, that I've worked on collaboratively, being in a space or working remotely, and it always involves a combination of both, because nothing is ever finished. And it's never really finished on time, has really taken no less than a year. And even to do kind of basic projects. So these are just some examples of working in place, and the things that I have discovered myself that I need to bring to the forefront of my own work. And that really is that what's really critical is the way that people want to represent themselves. And that designers become facilitators in that work, but we're learning how to design at the same time within that kind of facilitated context. So we're learning from people, we're learning to listen, and we're learning how designing in the margins can bring the margins to the center, and really in the work that we do, I think making work that is authentic to people in the communities, that the people in communities can kind of put their stamp on and say, yeah, this is our work, and our work that's negotiated, is kind of really critical in shifting some power dynamics. So I think that we're probably, ready to go for questions, Gaby. So I don't have any conclusions per se, other than, always being invited in, and I really acknowledge that we are not saviors, and trying to do no harm in the work that we're doing, in design interventions that we have, and certainly sharing design with other people. My goal would be that people become designers within communities.
Right. Thank you so much, Maria. And I think that this, what you're describing, complements so well the previous points, right, by Denielle, Lesley, and Kelly, because you know, it's the whole spectrum. It's not only about, you know, how we do it, but also what we do with information, what we do with the products that, you know, we collaborate with or for, and what happens to our students. We all have students, right? And it's amazing to be able to bring some of those experiences in the classroom as well. And also thinking about how to, you know, what it means to do this kind of work respectfully, right? And respect really crosses many different levels. And you know, anything from, as I was pointing out at the beginning, anything from the social aspects to the historic aspects. So yeah, thank you so much. I prepared a few questions for our panelists, but I'm also aware of the time that we have. So, you know, if there is any of the questions that any of you would like to address specifically, I feel that many of these things we have already kind of covered in some ways, but I also want to open it up to the audience. So if any of the panelists has anything.
Maybe while the audience is thinking, I'll just add a quick thought to that, which I think kind of revolves around our evolving language of what design is and our role in design practice. And so looking at it not necessarily even maybe as design interventions, and figuring out what it means to be a designer at the table, to be collaborating with somebody else and truly working together, I think kind of comes with our evolving and shifting language around design and design practice too.
If I look at the first question, I think that it's good for us to remember that, okay, we are educators, and you know, sometimes we think that we're trying to give people an experience that's similar to work, but we can be a little bit more provocative than that. So, you know, we can see, well, how are we going to, you know, how do we provide the international collaboration experience, but in a way, well, I am always trying to be super disruptive, right? So, so my thing is, how do we disrupt the traditional way that things are done? How do we do this in a way that makes students more reflective, that makes students see things that they wouldn't normally see around them? Like, people don't see the power asymmetry in the work, in the way that we do this work, you know? So like, that's why I try to be creative with that collaboration of just completely changing the direction. You know, and it's the kind of challenge that I would put out to other people, so that the students benefit from the international collaboration. It doesn't look like exactly like what it might look like in their work lives later on, but it's a space for a lot of learning and reflection that they can take into the work life later on as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, Lesley and Denielle. I'm gonna check the chat real quick and see if we have any questions. And please, anyone from the audience, if you want to, you know, just chime in, feel free to do that. I'm going through the chat.
Yeah, jumping in off some of the comments I've put in the chat, that I think that if true collaboration is actually a goal and it is like successfully prepared for and achieved, that it is actually disruptive when we look at typical study abroad, work abroad, or volunteer abroad experiences, where, you know, we're not adequately, and I say we collectively, we're not adequately preparing students for this. A lot of it takes on sort of like extended tourist mentality. There's a lot of like objectification, tokenism, and like this dissociation from the culture where you experience it as a visitor as opposed to somebody who's actually working in partnership. And so a lot of those typical opportunities, I would say, you know, true collaboration is scant. Like, we actually need to push for this. And this is what actually differentiates what I think all of us are talking about versus the typical norm of what is happening now. And I think, you know, to Lesley-Ann's earlier point about this like white savior complex, that is something that is actually inculcated in a lot of these programs. People say, hey, get on board, we'll go and we'll help those people. And that's what hooks a lot of students into this, and no one's really pushing back. Like, I think this is part of our call and opportunity, is say, like, it's not for, it's with. Like doing something with is very different than doing something for. And getting the students to the point where they're actually open to receiving the fact that, you know, the people they're collaborating with have their own expertise that the students themselves do not have, right? This is like very mutual, right? So yeah, I think like getting to all of those places, it's really challenging and tricky, but I think this is where, you know, this type of work really begins to make a difference and start to chip away at some of these norms. And statistically too, I mean, in the US and globally, we're looking at pre-COVID a less than 2% study abroad rate. So if that gives you a sense of the work that needs to be done, in the US alone, we have under 400,000 of our 20 million college and university students who actually get to have some kind of international experience, and most of those experiences are not international collaborations. So some sense for you.
There is a lot to be done, right, when it comes to studies abroad and, you know, those kinds of experiences that, you know, in many ways, you know, like in the second question, for example, I was intending to refer to disruption of people's spaces, right, their context, their lives. And that idea, I also have a lot of problems now with the word empathy, because in many ways, empathy, the way that, you know, traditional canons like this, you know, even though more contemporary, but it's still traditional, like design thinking or, you know, some others that, you know, utilize the idea of empathy to almost like to just have the right to self-impose in people's spaces, right? Because we're building empathy. Well, you know, what if instead of that, we just bring the people in the design process, because they know more than anybody else about themselves, right? So there is a lot to, you know, reconsider and to think about, and also how we prepare students for those experiences, right? Yeah. So I hear someone.
Sorry, Gabby. Just thanks to all the panelists. I always feel whenever I'm in such conversations or such panels, I get so overwhelmed with what to say, because I'm in argument with a lot of things. There are a lot of things that I just feel so fired up that sometimes I don't even know how to articulate what I want to say. So I took a few notes here, and I'll be very, very brief, but just to add into what you were saying, Gabby, about disruption. I don't remember if it was Lesley that made a comment on this idea of speeding up solutions. But as you were presenting, I was reflecting on how we don't spend enough time really analyzing the impact of the ideas, the solutions, or the strategies that that we pursue in such collaborations, and oftentimes we are not only causing harm by way of disrupting local efforts, because if there are already local efforts happening that perhaps are not happening at the same speed that you might think are happening, but they are happening, and then you come in with your fast forward speed grant funded solution to build that well, what's going to happen is everyone's going to be excited about the sort of like the band-aid nature of that solution, because it's a quick fix, but then it's going to possibly derail what would have been a more sustainable effort towards those same solutions, right? So I don't think we think enough, or we engage with our students enough about the repercussions of these solutions, or what we think are solutions. Because, you know, like as you were saying, you know, to us, it's like we check off that box, it's a project, success, we go, we implement, we love implementing, implement, come back, and then that's done, right? So that's one thing I was thinking about. The other thing, I think maybe in the spirit of disruption, I don't know if it's so much of like a disruption, or shaking things up a little bit. I wonder if we would come up with different approaches to teaching this kind of work, if we truly thought about what students want to get out of it. Because I would imagine that sometimes the romanticization of projects that have you working in developing contexts just really stem from a place of students wanting to experience a different culture. And I wonder if sometimes we were able to strip away the burden of having to only go to say to Uganda because to go to Uganda by way of having to solve that something, strip that burden away, and let's go. Let's go experience the culture. Let's go boost that tourist economy. Let's go take on those safaris, because that's you also helping, right? But you're helping in a way that is by way of invitation, because let me tell you, my country loves tourism and they want you to come. Anyway, so to avoid rambling, I'll just stop there.
Well, I want to share my own moment of humility and acknowledgement of my own kind of saviorous tendencies. So when I did go to Uganda, right, to work, I was with the Commonwealth Secretariat to do that IT program that I told you all about. In my first week, so I was with a women's organization, women's entrepreneurship organization. In my first week, I met a woman with a PhD in IT who was a member of the association that I was going to help. And I mean, she became my friend. She was very supportive and all that, but I had to carry around the kind of guilt and shame throughout my entire 6 months in Uganda. Every time I checked in with her, like, why am I being paid in pounds when you are here? You know, and you are here, you already have a business here, you can be doing all of this, and I don't actually know why I'm here and you are not. You know, and so it's the thing that we have to think about all the time, as you said, Penina, who are we displacing when we do this kind of work? And then how can we move to collaboration so that, you know, so like if I went in with the pounds to support her business, you know, that could be a different model. So how can we then strengthen what's already on the ground if we are going to do this kind of work is something that we can reflect on.
Yeah, thanks, Lesley. So we need to start wrapping up. I just want to make sure that, you know, everybody had the chance to look at the chat and ask you if there is something of the comments or maybe some of the questions that you may want to, you know, address, or if anyone in the audience wants to just give us a final thought before we close.
I asked a question in the chat, was for Denielle and Kelly. So about the coding communication styles, because I'm interested. Can you guys hear me? Yes, right? When I was seeing these examples with the banners, and there was Arabic and looked like Chinese, some Asian language. So there was like already like cultural differences on top of the international different locations. So how do you navigate when you get students in a new class, a new semester, and you still don't know them? You don't know as much of, maybe you do them from other classes, but how you team them up so that the teams work successfully, even when there's this disparity of cultural backgrounds.
Denielle, do you want to start?
I was just gonna give the mic to you.
So one thing that we do is we never start one immediately right off the top of the semester. We always take at least like a week or two to get to know our students first. And we're using that time to introduce some of these ideas about dismantling stereotypes, understanding privilege and power, and really trying to help set the stage for preparing students to enter into these relationships. And we're also having the students really like do some introspective and self-analytical work. So yeah, Denielle, you want to talk about that?
I just wanted to dive in there and you can pick back up. I just wanted to sort of say that that's a two-way street, right? So I think it's pretty typical in an American context. So to sort of have this perspective of we're bringing all this unconscious bias or biases with us, which for sure is true, but that also is a two-way street, and my students have a lot of opinions and a lot of unconscious bias towards Americans as well, and unpacking that and spending time, real deep learning and internal classroom time together to work on that before the collaboration ever begins, I think is critical to that process in which kind of Kelly was talking about. And that's tricky work, it's hard work, and it's important work. Perhaps it's the most important part of the process, rather than those, design outcomes that look maybe flashy or whatever. But for us, I think it's the back end work that really truly matters.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think some of those early preliminary activities that we do with them, I agree with you, Denielle, that those are probably some of the most important and critical. And I think they actually really stick with the students throughout because they make such a huge impact. They do make them extremely uncomfortable at first, and that is a natural part of this process. I mean, we're bringing up topics that are not typically discussed in, their other design or any other courses that they're taking for that matter, and putting them in a position to talk about things like race and bias and privilege, and really confronting that in themselves and each other, and thinking about those discrepancies and what that actually means, not only for themselves as individuals, but once they enter this dynamic, and how are they going to actually manage that. So we use this as an approach for creating interest and questions to start the dialogue once they do connect.
Yeah. And I think what many people did here today, which is something that I do in my classroom too, is acknowledge your privilege, acknowledge the opportunities, acknowledge, your background, talk about your own experiences as maybe an international person. I was born in England, I'm Australian. I grew up in the US, I've lived in the UAE and Qatar, we're all these complex characters, right? But also I come from a Western perspective. I have a lot of privilege and power in how I look and how I speak. My nationality, we talk a lot about nationality, which is really a huge barrier, particularly in the Middle East, towards economic, stability, all kinds of tricky topics. And so I think that acknowledgement, which I think this group has done so wonderfully when you've introduced yourselves, is what we need to also do in the classroom too. And students hearing that also kind of helps them model that kind of behavior and understand their place within those spaces.
And it also depends on the group of students, right, that you're working with, because, I'm sure that many of us who are in similar universities could say, many things that, we share about our student populations, but then, there is such a huge variety of universities and colleges that, have very different populations as well. So I think that many of these topics, right, that we're talking about are in many ways already known by many of the students, right? Things like, privilege and marginalization and those kinds of elements that are so important to the conversation. Yeah. I would love to hear more about power dynamics in the collaboration that Lesley-Ann shared. Lesley, do you want to share something, some final words about that?
The collaboration in Trinidad. Okay, so what did we do with the power dynamics? We actually started off with an anthropology text by Mina. I don't remember his first name, but it's about the Nasirema, where he describes, it's an essay where he's describing this tribe and all of the things that they're doing. And then as you read, you realize that the tribe is actually American people. That's Nasirema is American backwards. So we started off with this kind of anthropology text, and then we just created a scenario where the people in Trinidad were studying the Nasirema tribe and then trying to understand what was going on with the Nasirema tribe. And so, like I said, it was an anthropology class. They did interviews where the people in Trinidad led the interviews with the students in California. And then they had to go into their saviorist kind of mode and analyze and say, well, okay, what should we be designing to save these people? And the interesting thing, though, is the analysis was accurate. And so that's the thing that we all had to sit down and we had to reflect on, is this good or bad? This thing of this outsider. So we talked about the tension between an outsider perspective and an insider perspective and where that could be good. So these outsiders who had the power, they analyzed and they diagnosed the students in California as needing more social interaction. And, you know, they try to figure out, well, how can we design more social contact for these people? Because obviously they don't have any friends. And, and the thing is, from the perspective of somebody in the Caribbean, really the way that people live in California would be this kind of absolute kind of friendless, not everyone in California as well, but, you know, that was the striking thing that was very strange for them. And so the Californian students then had to reflect on, okay, so when we go and we look at people in Ghana or wherever, we are actually taking our frame into that, because the Caribbean people looked at us through their frame and they figured we had all of these problems. And they talked about in their reflections how they resented their lives being described as problems. And so, you know, so we never went into design because the class actually wasn't about design. It was about that whole anthropology step at the start, and trying to get people to reflect on that whole thing, that other people's lives can't just be problems. You know, we have to have a more complex analysis of what happens in, you know, when we look at other people and their lives.
Yeah. Thanks, Lesley-Ann. That's really fascinating.
Don't worry, Penny. We're about to finish, so you're not going to be missing out too much.
The fear of missing out is so real.
Yeah. Actually, no, I want to thank everybody. I'm sure that if you're here, you probably know our social media and websites and all that, right? And I also want to tell you that we have more events coming up. So, you know, please stay on top of everything that we're announcing on social media for the upcoming events, roundtables, mixers, and all that kind of stuff. Let me take a final look at the chat if there is something else. Yeah, well, thank you so much, everyone, for, you know, this opportunity to share your knowledge, very important knowledge. For all of us who are doing work internationally and even locally, I think that, you know, students could learn a lot about themselves and about other people just by doing work locally. And I feel that that is an excellent preparation for, you know, later international work. So I invite you all to just, you know, think about how we can integrate, you know, our own backyards in our work. So any final words?
I actually made a similar comment in the chat about like needing to actually teach our students about collaboration before we put them into these scenarios, and dismantling this like myth of the lone design genius. And I put a link in the chat to Rebecca Tuckmeyer and Marty Maxwell-Lean's new book about collaboration in design education. Shout out, Rebecca. And designed by Alberto, who's like, I don't know if he's yeah. But yeah, I mean, this I think is an important starting point, and great point that you made, Gaby, about making sure that our students are actually like thinking about this locally. And I think that's a great proving ground before we extend it globally. And certainly we can have a lot of intercultural collaborations that can occur just within one country. I mean, look at the diversity within the United States, and gosh, all the problems that we have. So not that we want to problematize individuals, but, you know, one approach Denielle and I take is like looking at problems of shared concern and using that as a basis, so that it's not about an individual or a particular culture or a particular place, but how do we actually use our perspectives on a problem that we both care about in order to come together.
Kelly and Gaby, thanks for those points. I think that, you know, thinking about Paul Pollock and design for the other 90%, I mean, really where designers tend to focus our energies are not necessarily with people who, you know, people who can't afford designers. So kind of bringing design within communities. And I think to the point of, sometimes for many university students, even local communities can feel like a foreign context, right?
Absolutely.
As well as the local communities can think the universities are foreign context. So that's kind of what we're dealing with here. It's like there is a division, and how do we create more equitable engagements? So that, you know, to those points, I think, you know, whether it's international or locally international in that sense, they're really great opportunities. for collaboration that's respectful, right? I guess, yeah, respectful and thoughtful and really what, you know, needed, but that's probably another roundtable.
Yeah.
Yeah, the downtown divide and collaboration, right? Next roundtable.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I think we're done. I am